Thanks for joining me. Today I'd like to talk about the pros and cons of using a teleconverter for bird photography. Now, I'm not saying wildlife photography because I really don't shoot too much other wildlife apart from birds. So I'm calling it bird photography. What is a teleconverter? Well, this is a teleconverter. It is a very small camera accessory that fits between your camera and your lens. And these days, around 90% of the time when I go out photographing birds or capturing videos of birds, I use this teleconverter. Because I shoot Nikon, I use the Nikon 1.4 TC teleconverter version 2. I do shoot with a mirrorless camera, but because my lens is from the digital SLR era, I have to use the older teleconverter. I cannot use the new Z-mount teleconverter because they just won't work with my Nikon 200-500 f5.6 lens. Now, what does a teleconverter do? Well, a 1.4 teleconverter magnifies your focal range by magnification of 1.4. So when I'm out to 500 mils, when I zoom like this at 500 mils with my teleconverter on, it now becomes 700 mils. So I'm getting extra reach. And before I had the teleconverter, the only way I could get that extra reach was by cropping. Now, I was very content with cropping my images, but the problem was that my 24 megapixel image became a 12 megapixel image. So I lost a lot of megapixels, but I was willing to accept that just to get closer to my subject. Now with the 1.4 teleconverter, I'm getting that extra range. And you might be surprised, but I still at times will go to in-camera cropping if the bird is quite small at 700 mils. Now, I'm not going to talk about why I do this because I could cover this on another video, but I still do it from time to time because at times there are advantages of cropping your image in camera. And I'll put a link to a video here that talks about this. Why do I use a teleconverter? Because there are pros and there are cons when you're using a teleconverter. On the pros side, the advantages is you're getting extra reach. So you don't have to crop the image and you're still getting 24 megapixel or 36 megapixel, whatever the camera that you're using, you're getting that extra reach. So that is a very good positive. The negative is that with my Nikon 200-500, it is an f5.6 lens. And before I had the teleconverter, I would shoot 90% of the time at f5.6. But with the teleconverter, because it is a 1.4 teleconverter, I'm losing just over a stop of light. So instead of f5.6, I'm now shooting at f8, which means I'm losing one stop of light. But not only am I losing one stop of light, but to get the image correctly exposed, my ISO has to increase by one stop. This is something that you have to be very mindful of. During the daytime, this is not a very big problem because even though your ISO will go up, it won't be detrimental to you. But very early in the morning or very late in the afternoon, this is going to be a problem for you because as light fades, then the ISO will climb very quickly. Remember that there is a big difference between photographing birds and landscape photography. In landscape photography, as the light diminishes late afternoon, it doesn't matter to us because we can just slow our shutter speed down and we can get a very good photo between ISO 100 and ISO 400 or even ISO 800. We're going to get a very good photo. But in bird photography, our shutter speed, it's not like 1/100th of a second. We're looking at shutter speeds between 1250th of a second up to 2000ths of a second, even 2500ths of a second, depending on what we're photographing. So shooting at 1600th of a second at f5.6 and shooting at 1600th of a second at f8 is going to give us a very big difference in our ISO. Also, depending on the lens that you use, it could affect the speed of the autofocus. The Nikon 200-500 is a slow focusing lens. So in low light, it is a bit of a problem to lock on to focus. A few days ago, I went out to Lake Eden quite late in the afternoon and I started taking photos at 4:30 in the afternoon. And before I show you the images that I took, I want to show you a sample of images to show you the differences between 500mm and 700mm, and show you that at the same shutter speed, how the ISO is affected greatly, even in daylight, even with a good amount of light. This is a little pied cormorant. You can see 1250th of a second, 500mm, f5.6, ISO 1250. f5.6 shows that there is no teleconverter. And the way that I photographed all these was that I had my camera on a tripod, so the images are very close to the same, and the lens was fixed to the tripod, so I kept taking photos with the teleconverter, then taking the teleconverter off to bring it back to 500mm. This was taken at 500mm. This image here was taken at 700mm. Can you see the extra reach? Look at the difference between 700mm and 500mm. At 700mm, we're shooting at f8. Instead of my ISO being 1250, it is now ISO 2000. Can you see that it's just about doubled? So this image here of the rainbow lorikeet was taken at 500mm at 2000 of a second at f5.6 with an ISO of 125. These rainbow lorikeets, same shutter speed, now at 700mm at f8 was ISO 400. During daylight, it's gone from ISO 125 to ISO 400. Not a big deal at all. And I should point out that all the photos that you're seeing here are straight off the camera. There is no editing. I didn't want to show any photos that were edited. I just wanted to shoot in RAW and in JPEG. And all the photos you're seeing here at the start of the video are the JPEGs straight off my camera. Now let me show you a sample of photos that I took without the teleconverter on and with the teleconverter, and you will see the difference. So this is what Lake Eden looked like at 4:30 in the afternoon. I was in the shade shooting across the top of the lake, and all the little white dots you can see there, they're the birds that I was photographing. So I'm shooting across the lake. This Pacific black duck was just in front of me. So this was the first photo I took. It was at 500mm, it's at f5.6, and my ISO was 1800. Now with the teleconverter on, I'm at f8 and the ISO is 3200. Can you see the difference? Look how far the duck is at 500mm. And these ibises were just feeding on the ground here in the shade. My ISO is quite high at 8000. Now, after these photos, I didn't move positions, but I changed my angle of photography from shooting into the sun to shooting with the sun going down. The birds that I was photographing, some of them were in the shade because they were starting to roost. They were starting to fly into these pine trees so they could sleep during the night. You will see that the birds that were still in sunlight, the ISO wasn't that high, but the birds that were in the shade was quite high. And this is the trees that these birds were roosting in, were flying to roost. You can see on the far left there, all the white dots in the tree, they're all egrets. So these next examples show you the difference both at 700mm and at 500mm, when the bird is in the sun and when a similar bird is in the shade at that same distance. So this image here is of some cattle egrets resting, but the sun is still shining on them. At f8, my ISO is only 720. But look here, I found a cattle egret that was in the shade. There was no sunlight on it, and the ISO has climbed all the way to 2200. At 500mm at f5.6, look at the ISO. It's only 450 compared to when I was using the teleconverter at 720. If we go to a cattle egret that was in the shade, at 500mm, the ISO now is 1250. This is something that you really have to be mindful about when you're shooting early morning or late in the afternoon. And these last two photos of a cattle egret were taken at around 5:15. So around 45 minutes elapsed from the first photos that I took to this set of images. So at 500mm, f5.6, the ISO is 7200. Now when I put the teleconverter on, the same cattle egret, it is now at f8 and the ISO is 12800. Look at the difference when I zoom in. At 500mm, at 700mm, where the ISO is 12800. Can you see that a teleconverter has its good points and also has its bad points. There's positives and negatives to everything. Remember that using a teleconverter can be good. And if you're into bird photography and you're photographing at a certain distance, then I do recommend using a teleconverter. But please, before you go out and buy a teleconverter, check your lens to see whether a teleconverter will fit on the lens and whether the image quality will be the same. It will not be better. Understand that. It will not be better. Some teleconverters actually aren't that good, that they degrade your image. So be mindful of that when you choose a teleconverter. Here's a sample of some images that have been edited. So you will see the JPEG image and then the edited raw file that I've gone into Adobe Lightroom and edited, and also used Topaz denoise to reduce the digital noise. So this is a Pacific black duck. First JPEG, now the raw file edited in Adobe Lightroom. Now look at this cattle egret just flying along. This is a JPEG. Now here's the raw file edited. But look at the cattle egrets here when they were roosting. Still very sharp. These are the ibises that were in the shade at ISO 8000 using noise reduction software. Gave me a very acceptable image that I'm still very happy to share. And look at this Pacific black duck here, taken at 700 mils, f8, and look at the ISO 12,800. Now the raw file edited. We don't have to be scared too much these days of using a high ISO because our cameras are so good. The Nikon Z6 II is already like 3 or 4 years old. So, and here are the last two images. This is of the Banksia flower with the teleconverter on at f8, 700 mils, and now the raw file edited. The ISO is 12,800. And look at the image, it is still very sharp. This flower here was only around 5 meters away from me, so it was very close. So it is very different when you're shooting at high ISO, depending on the distance between yourself and your subject. And there are so many variables when it comes to using a teleconverter in bright light or even in ambient light, like I did a few days ago between 4:30 and 5:30 in the afternoon, because it depends, one, on the available light that you have. Is the bird in the sun? Is the bird in the shade? Two, it depends on the distance between yourself and your subject, the bird that you're photographing. How far is that bird from you? Because the further distance that the bird is from you, then that is going to affect your sharpness as well. The bird is going to be much sharper when it is closer to you than it is when it is much further away from you. And three, it depends on your shutter speed. What shutter speed are you using? Are you using a very high shutter speed, or are you trying to minimize the ISO range by using a slower shutter speed? And like I stated at the start of the video, with bird photography, I wouldn't come down lower than 1250th of a second because I want sharp images. Birds are constantly on the move. Even when they're feeding, they won't just be standing still, they'll just be moving around. So that's why I don't shoot at anything lower than 1250th of a second, and I normally shoot between 1600th of a second and 2000th of a second. If this video has been helpful for you, give it a big thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do. It really helps me out with YouTube. If you have any comment or feedback, leave it in the comment section below. I'd like to hear your thoughts about this. Thanks for watching. Enjoy your bird photography, and I'll see you next time.